All right, everyone. So, welcome back to the documenting series. Every single call, we seem to have changed location. This time, my location's the same, but we got a new face on the call today. I'd like to introduce Jack to everyone. Jack has been the lead developer, sort of taking the CTO role within this project. So he's been the one writing all the code, and I've been doing a lot of work with him in terms of building out the tech side of the product. And so the purpose of this call, just if anyone's watching, I just want to give you a bit of an itinerary. Obviously, I'm going to get Jack to introduce himself. I'm going to make this call very focused on developers. So how to bring on a developer, what to sort of give them. And, it would be good to get Jack's knowledge from that. And we're also going to actually demo the product. We've been going through Figma and doing designs a lot, but we actually have been building a product. So this will be the first time we can demo it. And then I'm also just at the end going to share. So there's going to be two parts to this. The first part, from Jack's perspective, what he wants to receive as a developer working with a founder. And then I'm going to touch on what I think founders or product designers should know, payment structures, working with developers, etc. A little bit of a product demo, and then go over the tech stack. So, Jack, introduce yourself, sort of give a little bit of your background. I know you've worked on tons of things, lots of languages, lots of stuff. So, just to anyone watching, who is Jack?
Hi, I'm Jack Jones. At the minute I'm working as a full stack developer for Courtne. Worked freelance for a few years. Worked for loads of really cool companies, really cool projects, many different tech stacks, many different languages. I think the most important part of being a developer in like the modern sort of ecosystem within technology is being able to be flexible. And I think being able to use that and just take on as much work as I can, working in interesting tech, interesting people, interesting projects. I think it's a really, really good time to be a developer. I'm really enjoying working on that. I've worked with big companies, small companies, single founder companies like this, where it's about trying to get this MVP out, trying to get the audience interested, building up hype, just trying to create a really, really useful, robust solution. I think there's so many different avenues right now. I don't think there's been a better time to be a developer, and I'm really grateful to be working with Courtney and working on this really, really cool project.
Awesome. Why don't you share a little bit about your experience? Because I interviewed loads and loads of people for this position, and I can tell you like the things that stood out for me, at least when I looked at you, is the fact that you've done a lot of customer facing roles in terms of dealing with clients. Because a lot of developers, they sit behind their keyboards and they knock out incredible, beautiful code, but they don't really know how to speak to customers. And you've done a lot of that. You've also managed a few teams and managed a few developers, which is its own skill set in and of itself. And then exactly what you said, you've worked with smaller teams, lower budgets. Speed is more important than perfection. But then you've worked in much larger cross-functional organizations, right? There's a lot of team members and a lot more sort of operational complexity going on.
Yeah.
So sort of walk me through sort of some of the projects that you worked on, because I think you have actually done something with Stripe, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I worked as a contract developer for Stripe, working. So this was just as I decided to go freelance, and I left a large development agency. I was approached by someone, a client that I worked with in the past, who was really happy with my individual work within this agency. That I was given the opportunity to work on working more of a solution architect role for a problem that Stripe was dealing with at the time through a third-party contract organization. I can't say too much about the specifics of what I worked on with Stripe, just due to the disclosure agreements around that. But it was really interesting working with a team of developers from an external standpoint, rather than working with a non-technically literate team as a contractor. It was a really interesting problem. And I think we're going to touch on this more later about what developers expect from founders and especially smaller companies, how you can make the developer's life as easy as possible. But I found that being comfortable with knowledge and lack of it is absolutely key to maximize productivity from a developer standpoint. And that was really apparent when working with a technically literate team.
Yeah. And I see that all the time, especially when founders are sort of trying to build their MVP out, because then usually they just have no technical experience. And then working with someone who is technical and non-technical is a very, very different segue, which actually takes me to my next point. So what I wanted to do now is I wanted to basically just set the stage for you to walk us through, if you were to work with a new founder, what would you like to receive? Because there's two places I think people are if they're watching this. One, they're building out a SaaS themselves. And they probably are a marketer or a founder, or they had an idea and they're bringing an external developer to turn that into reality. or two, they are technical and they're bringing in an external developer because there's just too much tech debt and they just need someone sort of to help them with it, right? And I'm sure you've had, founders come to you where they know exactly what they're doing and they give you everything you need and it's super smooth. But then I'm sure it's also been, a roller coaster where like everything is hard. A lot of it comes down to building things and not having correct expectations and all those things. So if I was to start a new project with you as a developer, what would you want to receive from the founder? What would make your life easy so that anyone watching this can sort of basically make a checklist of what you're about to say and give that to developers when they start out?
Yeah, sure. So I think the most important thing is clarity and consistency. And I think this goes across all aspects of business when you're dealing with clients and you're dealing with like users, whatever. Be clear with what you need me to do. Be clear with the level of oversight you want me to have over the project as a whole. And then be consistent with how you apply that. Don't go to me and say, you need me to do this, this, and this. And then later down the line, after I've committed myself to these roles within the organization, within the project as a whole, go, oh no, in fact, we're going to change the way we're approaching this. And actually, I want to decide how we're going to do this. Be clear with the way that you approach the project from what you need a developer to do, and then uphold the standard that you set initially. Now, I'm sure Courtne's experiences in the past where he's worked with people and they've changed their minds over how they want to do things, and that in itself is fine. But don't enact expectations on the developer and then alter them in a major way that affects the way the developer can commit to the role. Now, that's just falling on specific project experience I've had in the past where I've built things and then I've had arguments essentially with founders about the way that they oversight and how they're, oh, you went around this way, you've done this, you've done that. In fact, we wanted it to be done with this. When initially there was no mention of this, and they said, you can be flexible with how you want to approach this. Now,
when you
carry on.
I just wanted to interject there. When you say sort of changing things, are you talking about like changing product specs, so designs, functionality, or are you talking about like, hey, I thought you were using this underlying technology or you're using this language or whatever? When you say changing things, which one are you referring to?
I think it's somewhere in the middle of both of them, where it's like, it's a conversation about the stack that you have when you're scoping out the problem at the start. Now, that should all be set in stone, and that is in place, like, that's fine. The problem I'm talking about is the expectations that the founder has to the way the developer will interface with the project, as in what decisions they're allowed to make, and their expectations in that angle. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. So when you say decisions, are you talking about product design, like functionality, or project design, project management?
Project management.
I'm just trying to understand project management.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good because we're gonna talk about that just now. Do you find that founders sort of give you a Figma file and say, here's the product, this is what I want to build, do it, and they don't get involved in project management? Or do you find that they try and micromanage it on top of it? I'm actually quite curious. So I think my approach to this, I think I've just been in the trenches for so long. I sort of like know exactly what's going on, but I sometimes forget that a lot of people don't have that background. So I'm actually quite curious how people have approached this with you.
Well, I think a part of that is the fact that I can be quite selective with the jobs that I take on. And I tend to get an initial vibe from a founder, and like, if I get the feeling that they're going to be overbearing, then I usually step away and say, this isn't the project for me. Because I want to be able to, I think development is underlying creativity, and I think that those two things go so hand in hand. And the way that a lot of modern like SaaS founders do development is less of a creative art and more of a, I want this to do this, do this. There's like a means to an end. Where I think if you allow the developer more freedom and more flexibility, while also demonstrating how you want things to be done, you'll end up getting a better product because they're able to print their personal approach and work in the way that's most efficient for them.
The only thing that I would just say with that from my experience is it depends on the seniority of the developer.
Definitely.
Right? So you're coming from the standpoint of being super senior, a lot of projects experience under your belt, and you also have design skills, right? Like you can use Figma and stuff. I've worked with loads of developers that don't have that. And if you sort of give them freedom, then what ends up happening is things sort of go, way off scope, and then they sort of need to be hampered down. And an example from the actual product that we can demo actually a bit later, but just to bring this point home, part of what was happening with the design is we have this color picker, right? Where you can choose a custom color and accent throughout the app. It's a very small feature, but it's a feature nonetheless. And the designs in Figma represented this fairly complicated color picker thing, which would have been quite complex to build. And I assume would have taken enormous amounts of your time to build it. And the result is like, hey, we just need someone to like choose a custom color. Like it's not that complicated. And the UI is negligible because it's the same thing. And when we got to that, you looked at the designs and you were like, well, I can do this, but it's going to take lots of time, super complex, or I could do something else. And I think you and I traded a couple Slack messages, and then you just built out something which achieves the same thing with way less tech debt and way less complexity. We didn't need to go in Figma and redesign things and whatever. And I think that's a perfect example of me sort of giving you the freedoms. Like, look, this is what needs to happen as like the end goal. The UI sort of needs to blend into the product, etc. But I'm happy to sort of let you take the lead and then come up with your own solution. Is that sort of a good example for the point that you're making there?
Yeah, definitely. I think the agile mindset isn't like a transactional thing. Like it goes through all aspects of the project. If we're going to go about it in this way, then it's not agile in the sense of you don't need all this paperwork, you don't need all this. It's agile in the sense of be flexible and be open to change throughout the entire like development flow of the project.
Awesome. And we're going to show everyone how we manage that agile flow because we use a tool called Linear just now. What I want you to do now is two things because I think it would be super valuable. One, just recap the actual tech stack that we're using, sort of A to Z, because I think a lot of people are going to look at our product and say, well, what did they use? So I can just use the same thing. And I also know that we had to make a series of decisions. One of them being the database logic, right? I believe within the Google GCP cloud, we had two options and we chose one for a specific reason. And I know you did a load of research into that and all that. So get super technical with us, tell us the tech stack. And then after that, give me a checklist of things you want to receive. So like a Figma file, budget, milestones, et cetera, et cetera. Just run through both of those with us. Let's get super technical for anyone who actually cares.
Yeah, right. So this is just a quick aside, but the actual app is being coded with P3, which is Next.js, TypeScript, and Tailwind. That is like the agile Next.js development workflow. We can work quickly, we can work robust, we can work safe, which is the most important thing because we deal with payment information. So T3 is what we went with there. The database interface we're using is Prisma. We had it off between Prisma and Drizzle. I decided to use Prisma because we didn't need the specific database manipulation you get when using Drizzle. So there's two very technical things just out of the way. Yeah. So as far as the deployment goes, we elected with Google Cloud Platform. Now the options that we had there were GCP, AWS. A lot of people are using Vercel, which I'm not a huge fan of, but it makes things very quick, very easy. So a lot of founders will go, oh, the option that I have is to use Vercel, which is easy for someone like me who doesn't understand technology. But the drawbacks with that are that you essentially lose a lot of the optimization and customization options you have when using like a cloud provider like AWS or GCP. So I suggest that if you're a new founder and you're working with a developer and you go, oh, I want to do this, you've had a conversation with them about what they're comfortable using as far as cloud providers and deployment goes, because the odds are that they will have experience with a specific provider and will be able to get more out of it than you will be able to get out of something like Vercel. That's a really important point.
Yeah, and also, I mean, the only thing I'll just say from that is changing cloud providers is an enormous pain in the ass, right? Like once you pick, and Vercel is one that is built on top of AWS anyway. So if you're using Vercel, you're using AWS. It's just a wrapper with a fancy UI and different pricing with a markup, I will add, that they make it easy for non-technical people to deploy code and stuff. So I would just tell the person who's looking at this is really you need to gauge the relationship with your developer, right? If you're super non-technical and it's like a third-party contractor that you found on Upwork or whatever, and you don't have the greatest relationship with them, maybe still look at Vercel just because you're going to have to do most of the management anyways. But if they're super senior and there's a long-term relationship, even if you're non-technical, I would still look at either GCP or AWS. I think it just comes down to those two. You can look at Azure and things, but for most part, I think those two. And then I would also just tell people to check the developers' certifications. Like that's important.
Yeah.
Because you did the Google Cloud certification stuff.
Yeah,
and like
GCP
Google
certification.
Yeah, they actually issue these things, and it's a super easy thing for founders to do, which is like ask the developer for those certifications. And I know a lot of people don't like certificates and things, but they actually do matter in this world. I think people underestimate the value from those things. So, yeah, keep going with the rest of the tech stack.
Yeah, so when we deploy and we're in place, and we're thinking about how we can make this as lean as possible. Because tech stack is one of those things where it's really easy to blow it. It's really easy to go, oh, I want this, I want this, I want this. And then all of a sudden you end up spending however much money per month on a recurring subscription to do something that you really didn't need to do. It's all about bootstrapping wherever possible and just trying to really nail down specificity in what we do. So as far as email deliverability goes, I use Customer.io. Now, this is what you had experience with, Courtne, so we went with it. But this is a general rule for all of tech stack and the whole approach is that basically every technology is going to be the same. And the specific provider that you decide to use, the differences are going to be pretty marginal. So be flexible and be open to what your developer has experience with, especially if they're a senior developer. You use them before and you have a good relationship. Have an open discussion about this rather than going in with a fixed, well, I want to use this, I want to use this, I want to use this. Yeah, you might have your strengths, but just be flexible.
And I know that I pushed quite hard on Customer.io there. I know you didn't really have a preference. As you said, it's email software, it's all the same. The reason why I press for Customer.io and why I would tell people to look at it is just because a lot of the tools like Mailgun, etc., they're super well designed for developers, but they do not have the marketing element in it. And when it comes down to customer communication, of course, from a development standpoint, you have Magic Link, you have these things that are required for the product to work. But like the marketing, people forget about. Like that's where the money is made, right? If there's no users, then the product dies. And in-app notifications is super important, especially for the future. If you're going to do, an app with in-app notifications and Slack and just general flows like onboarding flows, sort of on-ramp flows, reactivation flows if customers churn. And most of the companies that I found, they have a technical email service for all the magic links and like password resets and stuff. And then they still use something like, I've seen MailChimp, I've seen like very random cobbled together marketing softwares because you still need to do both. And Customer.io is unique in the sense that it has both in one place. So marketers can understand what's going on, developers can understand what's going on, and then it centralizes the customer information so that it acts as a little bit of a CRM. So you don't have things going on all over the show. For an MVP, it's not important, but in the future, it is quite important that you have data sync as well. And that's not a thing that we've discussed yet because I don't think it's important, but it's things like having Facebook and Meta pixels embedded in the product so that it is firing as users are doing things, because most apps have a free trial. And if you're trying to do tracking, you're trying to run paid ads, you're trying to drive engagement with it, you actually have to track more than just, the person started a free trial. You have to track what happens afterwards. Otherwise, Facebook and YouTube and others don't get the actual conversion data. And I found that to be extremely difficult if you're using a combination of softwares. Customer.io just happens to do it in one. And that's what they built it for, to solve that problem. And it's used by Notion. It's used by like Close.com. It's used by a lot of companies. So that, from the email standpoint, I think the marketing person should have more of a say, I would say, than the developer, because for the developer, it doesn't actually matter, right? It's emails, it's the same thing. But being able to actually use it on an ongoing basis without getting developers involved and being quick and fast, I think is super important. So that's the only part of the tech stack I think marketing and salespeople should have a bit more of a say than the other stuff. But yeah, I digress. Keep going. I think we've got a few more things in the tech stack.
Yeah, it does was really, really good. Yeah, that's really good. Sentry for error monitoring, which is the sort of like the industry standard for like not bug fixing, but for catching errors and then logging them and then being able to reproduce them so your developer can fix them. It's an industry standard for a reason. It's really powerful. It's really good. It's not even that much money for how powerful it is, and it's essentially a no-brainer. You'd be hard pressed to find a developer that doesn't want you to have Sentry or B, know how to use Sentry. It's like a lot of industry standard. I think all of our customers are is with Slack and Intercom. Is it? How are you doing it? It's just you picked as well.
Yeah, so I chose Intercom for that, and the reason is, number one, industry standard. Number two, they merge marketing and customer support together, because part of what I spend a lot of time working clients with is customer activation, which is when someone joins a free trial. Customer activation is making sure they use the free trial, and Intercom is unique that it has those like tooltips, like how to use the product, blended with customer support, blended with also trying to get someone on sales calls if they're nearing the end of their trial and they're not activating or something like that. So again, a developer, it's basically just adding a line of code that just appears everywhere. So developer standpoint, it's super easy and simple. Doesn't really matter what you're using. But from a marketing and sales standpoint, that's very important. I just think that the way, and again, I'm very interested, I'm very curious if you agree with me on this, but the way I would approach this is the marketing sales individuals in the team should have a say on anything that is customer touching, which is usually customer support, customer activation, as well as most likely email communication, because that's all the flows, which is basically customer.io and intercom. Anything else, developers should sort of choose what they're comfortable with, and what makes sense from a technical standpoint. That's how I would sort of approach this. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, I'd say it's a good like boilerplate rule. Again, it depends on the seniority of the developer and your relationship with them and sort of what their role is within the company. Yeah, they're just a developer building one project to the contractor and then the relationship's done. Then
Yeah.
realistically, you should pick mostly everything. But if it's like a long-term relationship, like I hope we're gonna have, where we're building things together and we're building projects and creating lots of things, then working for both eyes is more important.
Awesome. I think that's everything in the stack, right? The only other thing that we can just mention is we use Linear for project management, which is just a way to keep track of what's going on, what the scope is, what the milestones are, etc. Is there anything else? And of course, we use Strive to pay for things and sort of act as our backend, which is unique to our product. Is there anything else in the tech stack? I think that covers everything.
I guess Slack could be counted due to the app modifications.
Yeah.
But yeah, might as well say it. It's like we use the Slack API where we will post a deployment for monitoring like stats and things like that. So that's it.
Amazing. Right. Well, let's start showing people stuff. I'd love for you to pull up Linear and sort of walk through the project and sort of narrate it. Now, the reason why I'm asking Jack to narrate this is the approach that I have seen work best with development is that the founder or the product designer works with the developer to essentially come up with milestones. And that is sort of the first meeting that we had is milestones and estimated timelines. I think it's very important that the founder or the product designer then lets the developer generate their own issues for those milestones, right? Because I've worked with teams where the person is trying to tightly control the developer. So they're trying to make all the issues or tasks for the developer, even though they don't actually have a technical background or know what's going on. And I just find that complicated. So if you have never used Linear before, it's a project management software specifically for building products. This is not a sales pitch for Linear, so I don't think we need to explain the software in depth. But I think just walk through the project that we have, sort of the milestones, how you set up the issues, and then how you're using it on a daily basis, because it is quite unique.
My computer's taking an absolute pounding from Riverside, so we'll see how it goes. As you can see right now, we have the project here, VOV 1.0, which is listed within the roadmap of when we started development on March 22nd, and we aim to have the MVP finished on April 21st. So as you can see, Courtne, the team lead, as he sort of is managing and creating the account and working over what's happening. And I am the minute the member. The tag is 21st, but obviously it's flexible. So initially, when we were setting up the budgets for the project and the whole development workflow, because Milestones is intrinsically tied to the budget of the project, the most effective way to develop, we made a list of everything that we needed to do, broke that down further into sub-problems, which essentially founded the basis of what became the issues. So the first part that we went for was the reusable front-end components. So my approach generally when I develop is just to smash out all of front-end, stay done. Then I can just think about the API routing and the server-side logic. That's because front-end is sort of a monotonous task for me personally. It's very straightforward, because you're just building like visual things, and it's not like that mentally taxing. You get instant visual feedback on what you do, but it takes time. So that was, I'd say, like the first 30% of the project was containing the reusable front-end components.
Just for the non-technical people, just to explain what that means, essentially what that milestone represents is taking all of the components that we've designed, the actual screens and the Figma stuff, and then building it into code, because a product is essentially a collection of components reorganized across screens. Like a button is a button. Yeah. It's in different places and it says different things, but generally the design of the button is the same. And so I actually found this quite unique as a development approach, and I really liked it. Where basically once I gave Jack the Figma file, he essentially built all the components and then put them all on one screen. So this is not like an actual product screen. It's just a screen with a list of all the stuff on it. Yeah. And then from there, it's a case of copy, paste, put it in the right place, and then wire up functionality afterwards. But I think it's a really good ethos to have because, as you said, it's very repetitive, but it's also quite important because at that point there's no logic, it's just design. So if I want to change certain things, it's a lot easier to do it there than when things are on screens, because then you have to change it in a million different places, as well as then things are wired, right? So I just think it reinforces that element as well. But yeah, keep going.
Yeah, we essentially got to view every flaw within the app and highlight any inconsistencies or where things aren't quite right or the styles don't match within the design files, and then they could be locked for when we were doing back end, which is really useful for this. Where the design was essentially being finished as I started working on the front end components.
Yeah. I'll talk about that when I get to my recommendations. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so after that, we went straight into the database logic, but I'm just going to touch on the issues first. So with linear and with the agile mindset as a whole, sorry, again, my computer is being very slow for some reason. To break down a milestone into issues. An issue is a specific problem that has like one quick solution. As you can see, this specific milestone has 54 of them, I think it is. Or even more. 74 of them. And for me, an issue is something that is a self-contained problem, which I can finish in a reasonable amount of time. So an example of an issue was the Teams page, the whole workspace management page. And then I broke that into sub-problems, and I'm going to show you that here. I guarantee this will all make sense. It's just quite tedious, like with the wording.
Okay.
So as you can see, SPO 48, every issue is numbered and included within a milestone. This doesn't necessarily mean they have to be done in that order. Again, Agile is a mindset thing where it's like you lay out everything in front of the problem and then you just go at it. So as you can see, the buttons issue, which was within create reusable front-end components, is a sub-issue of the 404 page, which is, for non-technical people, is the not found page. If you navigate to a page which it shouldn't be there, you get an error, generic error page. So with that, there was two unique buttons that had to be created. There was a toggle logo and a white body with a black text with a back arrow one. So I broke it down into the problem, built them, and then I had it integrated straight into the 404 page. Do you want to carry on with what you were saying before?
Yeah, I just want to. One of the things when I got into this world a long time ago that confused me is what is an issue. And I think for developers, it's very easy, but for non-technical people, think of an issue as a task. If you look at like traditional project management software, they call them tasks. Specific development software just calls them issues. I don't know why they chose a different name, but it's essentially the same thing. And so what we're essentially doing here is we're at a high level view looking at the product, breaking it into milestones, working with the developer on what percentage of work each milestone is. And then as Jack was saying, looking at that milestone and laying out all of the tasks or issues that are underneath of that milestone and then subdoing them. So for example, the 404 page, as you're going here, would have been one of the tasks. But within that page, there's a collection of components, in this case, the button, right? And then building all of that out. And the one thing that I wanted to there you go. One thing I wanted to ask you is you made a very good point there, which is Agile is about laying out everything that you think you're going to do, but then not necessarily doing it in terms of order, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You sort of bounce around. And I want you to explain sort of how you approach that bouncing around, because there's two ways to traditionally project manage. There's waterfall and agile. Waterfall is you literally plan everything out and then you start at 1 and you finish at 10, right? You knock it out traditionally. And then agile is what we've chosen to use and what I think software teams should use moving forward, which is laying everything out to the best of your ability, but then sort of knocking things out in terms of priority and ranking. And so just walk me through how, once everything was laid out, how you approach choosing selectively what to build. I think it'll be super valuable.
You should really put on waterfall. So waterfall within development and within software, the only use case that you ever really see it within the modern ecosystem is within government. Because there is so much paperwork, so much documentation, and over user data. You never ever see waterfall in any other use case, generally, apart from government. So with Agile and with linear and the Agile mindset within software development, you essentially creating reminders for you to break down tasks in the future. So at the start of the project, we laid out all these milestones. these represented a cluster of tasks. And I was saying to myself, when I get around to this, I'm going to work out what that actually entails. It's a broad word, a broad statement that encompasses loads of subtasks. So at the start of the project, we laid all those out. When development commenced, I saw create reusable front-end components. I then looked in the Figma file and I made a list of everything that needed to be done. And then as I went through each individual issue, each subtask of the milestone, I then broke that down further into sub-issues. The thing with Agile, from the founder's perspective, is being able to let your developer decide how he wants to break down that. Everyone has their own mindset. Some people will go, I'm going to work 3 milestones ahead and I want to be so on top of it. So then in the future, when I'm going to it, I know exactly what I need to do, exactly what I need to do. Personally, I would prefer to break down problems as I come to them, or work a single milestone ahead to give Courtne the information over what is happening. And sort of hit that compromise where he wants to know what I'm going through right now, but I want to know what I'm currently working on.
Correct. And I can also just tell everyone, like for me managing the project, one of the things that I have enjoyed doing is if I want to know what's going on, I just go look at the list of what's going on. Like Jack, I don't know if you've noticed, but like I don't ping you every day, like what have you done? Like how are things going? Occasionally I ask for a general status update, but for the most part, I just go and look. And I've found exactly that is you start with like a very broad list of issues. And then as the developer approaches it, he tends to break it down significantly smaller because at the end of the day, it's also quite nice and rewarding to check things off like a task list, right? Whereas if you just have like these massive big issues that take days to finish, it seems like nothing is happening where there is actually movement happening. And I can imagine from a developer standpoint, they want to communicate to the founder what they're doing, but it's hard to do that if it's like build this screen and there's so much work behind building the screen, so it looks like the task is just not moving. It's stuck in progress for like days on end because it's such a big thing. Whereas if you break that into much micro things, you can actually see stuff getting done, which from my standpoint as sort of the person running the team, that's really nice to see without getting too in the weeds of what's going on. But I also think that means that you have to trust the developer to lay out their tasks and sort of take that initial approach to things, which is useful. Is there anything else in Linear that you want to touch on? The only thing I can think of that has been useful is essentially I set up the project in Linear to ping Jack on a weekly basis for status updates. So basically to actually do a write-up of what's going on. It's just a nice documentation way for me to see what's happening as a moving sort of target without having to ask for it all of the time, which is quite nice.
Pretty sure what that is. I can't remember what it is.
Yeah, it'll ping you in your inbox. But to get it, it's that little there. If you see the little like heart rate thing going through it, top right corner.
Oh yeah, got you. Yeah, I need to write the report. So basically, with Linear, you have the opportunity of writing these like weekly reports of or however often, which is essentially like a 1-sentence, 2-sentence, just what have I done this week to break down to make the issues make sense to non-technical people. Because the issues are intrinsically technical.
By design as well. And the only thing that I'll just add to that before we get on is just avoiding the dialogue of founders reaching out to developers, just saying, what did you do today? Or how is things going? All of this is designed to create that documentation without having to ask. So I can look at the issues and see the progress. That's why you have that graph there in the bottom right? You can see the tracking of tasks moving on. So I don't have to always ask Jack, how are things going? What is going on? I can just see. And then the update sort of just on a weekly basis asks for a generalized update, non-technical, just sentences, which sort of sums it. So I basically never have to ask what's going on. I can see how far we are. I can see if we're on track. I can see if we're progressing. And a lot of that is handled by the system, which frees up a lot of my time and Jack's time getting on traditional calls. Like I think we've only been on, I can say, a handful of calls throughout this process. It's not like we're every day getting on calls, because I've noticed working with so many software teams, they spend so much time on calls where developers are just trying to speak to founders and just explain what's going on. And half the time they don't really understand anyway. So it's like wasting everyone's time. And it's that whole thing of doing work about the work, meetings, prep, whatever, instead of just doing the work. And sort of this setup intrinsically removes a lot of that, which I think is great. Cool. So that's Linear. The next thing that I wanted you to do, Jack, is really just show off the current state of the product. I think it would be nice. People have been seeing Figma designs and they've been seeing us talking for so long, it'd be nice to sort of see where the product is. And also if you just narrate where we are in the product, because from my understanding, we've built everything except the payment logic, which is sort of the Stripe API calls, and also your reasoning for it, because I think it was the right choice to make, is building all the stuff around Stripe and then attacking Stripe at the end, because Stripe is Stripe and a lot of API complications going on there. So just walk us through it.
Essentially, by building the API last, you can build an application which can take data from any source. So for whatever reason, obviously this wouldn't happen, but if you were to ever have to move away from Stripe and move to a new payment provider, then we have all these generic components that are able to take in data from any source. All this data is fed in from a local data source that I made within the app. That is essentially like a list of points. And then I can plug the Stripe data API providers that I'm going to make into that, and it works in the same data flow. The whole point of this is that you essentially, if you're working top down and you're assessing the way that the information goes in and out into the project through like the black box and then out to the user, is it clear the way the data is feeding through, or is it going from loads of different sources? It's like a maze, and you're getting out and you have this like absolute nightmare spaghetti code, impossible to read, impossible to use, impossible to update thing. So by building these reusable components, we can be totally sure that we're approaching this in the right way. So the data is completely made up, the revenue, the net cash, the MRR, and the whole table, all completely fake. But what isn't fake is the way these flows. Even this is just me testing the name of the workspace where I built the rename function. So let me take you through this and what we have right now. This isn't the most recent. Obviously, there's been design changes and also happening in the background. Like, I think we have a completely new sidebar from what we had before. So we need to do that.
Just while you're on that, I just want to make a point about that, because I want to make sure that if people are watching, they're still getting best practices from it. We did not follow best practice with this product because we were designing and building at the same time. There should not be a situation like this where Jack is like, we have an entire new nav bar that still has to be built, even though one is already built. That should not happen if you're doing things properly. It's always a case, I'm going to talk about that at the end, is like things that I've learned from this, but it's always the case to give a completed design file first. What happened in this instance is we have a lot of projects going on within the company. This is just one of them. And so we were managing, dev and design resources. And there was a lot of things that usually would not be the case for this. So I just want to highlight that, but I'll talk more about it at the end. But yeah, go ahead. Continue with the
I'm just going to touch on that because I think for some people, it is going to happen. Like, you're going to have people in those situations, but by having these like robust project management frameworks, having this open communication between me and you, we were able to manage through this absolutely non-ideal situation in a way that still allowed me to maximize productivity, but then also allowed us to continue building into the software in a way that sort of worked for both of us. So don't be afraid if you get in a situation like this. It's not the end of the world. Just make sure that your policies are very, very strong, and you can ensure that as you're going through this, everyone stays on the same page.
Cool.
Yeah. I'm sure. So this is the team management functionality. We decided that we don't have profile pictures for users and only workspaces, and that was a decision that we made just to streamline the whole user experience. We can add a team member to your workspace, and they will automatically have an account created, be associated with the workspace, and then you, as I'm sure Courtne has shown you with sort of the build and the design and that whole process, the whole point of it is that you're meant to have this one-stop shop, and then you can add people, create things, create settings, create payments, items, etc., and then everyone can just be in that. Every member in the user company that we need to create payments, you don't have to. We're trying to streamline things, so you don't want to create things twice. Is what I kind of get at.
Yep.
So I will just create a sample user. If I have the same email, it's quite slow because I'm running it on a local machine. We haven't deployed yet. You can create it, as you see, and you can also remove, and that just works. If you want to back have users, you can just create this and then send all in one go. Connections is Again, the part that we don't have yet, the page is in place, the components are there, but nothing's wired up. You see, this shouldn't be visible if this is turned off.
And this, again, just to go back to it, that task of creating reusable components, that's what you're seeing here. The thing that it looks right, but nothing works. That's that first milestone we were talking about.
Yes. And then that is exactly what we're going to do later down the line. Settings. This is the color picker we were talking about before.
Yes.
So if you go and look at the past videos in the series, and I'm sure at some point it will flip past the color picker that we had. It wasn't a reasonable thing. And this is about establishing expectations to the developers. You show that the communication flow is straightforward, and then if there's something like this and the developer goes, "This is unreasonable," you can just change it. You don't have to overthink things. So, what do you care?
No, I was just going to say this is like a perfect example because a color picker is like it's such a small feature in a software. Like most people probably don't even notice it past the onboarding. And the one that we had in design looked super fancy, but it would have taken Jack a lot of time to build. And I just thought, the amount of time building it versus what benefit we're getting just doesn't make sense. Where we can do something like this, which does the same thing, but a fraction of the effort. And I didn't jump into Figma and design things. I just sort of gave Jack, free space to just, as long as someone can choose their color and it looks okay, that's fine. And sort of this is what he came up with. And I think it works really, really well and achieves exactly what we're trying to do. And it probably took, 1/20th of the time, to be honest.
Yeah, it took me about half an hour versus about 12 hours. As you can see here, I purposefully exposed this. So when we're talking about this first milestone about creating and then wiring things in, this was the component that I created, the front end component. And then this was a test component I built as I was sort of building the backend logic. As you can see, this has absolutely no style. It's not useful, but it works. You can browse, you can upload. Let me just let all four with me. And there's absolutely no feedback, but it will work. And that is the goal of this section. We're trying to bridge this front end and back end divide. Like working as a full stack developer, it's all about being flexible. And I think they're two separate disciplines that you have to tap into separately. And by segregating them and doing the front end first, the back end after, you can really get in that mindset when you're doing back end of breaking problems down, but approaching it in security and all of the things that make back end development so finicky and tricky and hard to approach. You can circumvent the brain lag with switching between front end, which is a completely different mindset, and increase productivity massively. So as far as pages go, payments, which is the extra initially, team connections and settings are the main ones. We have some of the payment logic from the original prototype in place, but obviously nothing works. It's all just decorative. So there's a small teaser about what can be. As you can see, we have this old preview.
Yeah, that also changed. That's my bad.
But it's interesting to see how it's all configuration. I'm sure that if you look at this now, look at this when it comes out, you see how we got to where we ended up through the direction that we took.
Amazing. Thank you for that demo. I think it will be really exciting to show the demo once we've implemented all the changes, because there's a lot of nuances there. Like that's running on the local machine, so when it's live, it will be significantly faster and cleaner, and a lot of things will have changed. But cool. I think that wraps it up. The final thing that I wanted to do on this call is I've learned a lot building this product, and I want to sort of walk people through how to approach hiring a developer. So I'm just going to tell everyone what I think, and then Jack, at the end, I'd love for you just to say like, yeah, I completely agree or I disagree. Because a lot of people have been asking me, hey, I have this product idea, or I've got big budget, whatever. How do I go about hiring a developer? And I think it's an interesting question to have. So this is how I would approach it with the hindsight of what I've learned here and all the clients that I've serviced and all the clients I currently work with. I consistently tell people that start off by writing a thesis, so a Google Doc, essentially saying like, what is the product? Because a lot of people have like an idea, but like just start with the Google Doc, breaking down sort of screen by screen, or even doing like a user flow of what's going to happen, just because it forces you to get a bit more granular without having to engage super complicated tools, Figma, design stuff, etc. Because anyone can use a Google Doc, right? And essentially, if you can describe it, someone can design it. And if it can be designed, it can be built, right? But describing it is the first part. And a lot of people have ideas, but they don't have like, yeah, it should work like this or not work like this. And also this is like a small point, but super important, super important. When you're doing the documentation, which is the Google Doc, this is where you really need someone with a growth mindset to review it. Because when you are building things, it's not just about the functionality, it's about the usefulness. So in the previous call, I spoke about loads of decisions that I made for growth, like the navigation bar with the ability to cross-sell products and a few other things that are not functional, but they're designed for growth. And most people don't have that mindset. And that's how they end up building products, which look great, fancy, but they don't grow because they don't have these growth hacks built into it. So once you've written out everything in a Google Doc, get someone with a growth mindset to really look at it and say, okay, well, you can add this, you can do that. Like, let's make sure that this thing works. The same thing with marketing, engaging sales and looking at enterprise and how all these things are going to work. One of the most important things for simple payments, in my opinion, is the ability to add users, which wasn't in the initial spec. And then I added it just because like that's how we make money. So if I get it from a dev standpoint, it's like super boring. From a design standpoint, it's like this part of the app that people don't really go to. But like marketing and sales, like how do we make money? Well, we sort of charge more seats and then we manage the licenses and we have the ability to do enterprise sales and discount. Like that's important from a money standpoint. And I think designers and developers skip that part because it's boring, but it's actually quite important. And having a business model behind it. After that, I think that they should get into Figma. I am now of the opinion that if you are the founder of a SaaS company, I genuinely think it's unacceptable for you not to know your way around Figma. Like, I just don't think it should be, because there's a lot of founders that just say, well, let's hire a designer and let's hire a developer. Sure, hire a designer because they're going to be better than you, but you should be able to mock something up in Figma, especially because you can find UI kits and copy and paste components and just change text and colors. Maybe it's not your final design, but you can sort of get like an idea. And I genuinely say that because I think if you're building it yourself in Figma, like the cost is zero, right? It's just your own time as a founder. And I think at that point, you'll get an idea of if you're going to finish this or not. Like, is it worth building this or not? Once you have a rough like prototype done in Figma that you built yourself, and if, by the way, if you don't know how to use Figma, like learn, like go watch YouTube videos.
Incredibly
right?
easy
It's not
to
that
use.
hard. It's easy. Especially, I would tell people, take the approach of go buy a UI kit and then just copy and paste components and change colors, right? Because like that's even easier and you can get a rough version. Once you have that done and you're like committed to it, then hire a designer to come in and take your rough Figma and fancy it up, right? Create all the styles, make it look the way you want, sort of paint your vision. At that point, only once that is done, go speak to a developer, because I've seen founders do weird things. They speak to developers to potentially hire them before they even have a design and they have like no idea what's going on. I would say only once a design has finished the entire Figma file screen by screen and you're happy with all of it and it is neatly documented in terms of arrows, click this, this happens, all the states are outlined, then go engage a developer. Now, there's different approaches to hiring a developer. One of them is to pay them per hour. One of them is to pay on project. One of them is pay per milestones. I'll tell you what I have found works best. Once I have a completely closed Figma file, I'll then go to the developer and say, this is the scope of the product. This is what we are building. And I then want to come up with a total budget for the project. I do not like the pay per hour thing. I think it is a completely broken model for the following reasons. If you hire a really good developer, they move very quickly, but then they get penalized for it because they're billing less hours, right? But they're actually good. So it incentivizes taking long to do things, which I just don't think is ideal. And it also, from a founder standpoint, makes it impossible to project the cost because it could be anything, right? Because things change. I much prefer going, look, this is this scope and this is the budget that I have. Is it possible? And then having that conversation. And maybe you have to make hard choices like removing parts of the product because the developer says no, right? But essentially getting the developer to commit to a scope and committing to a total budget. That is, I think, the first element that I've found works very well. Then what I did is I sat with Jack and I said, okay, well, we have total budget, we have total scope. Let's now break the scope into milestones. And we came up with the milestones. And again, we did this in a Google Doc. It doesn't need to be complicated. It does not yet need to be in a system like Linear. It can just be something that everyone can understand and use. Once we had a series of milestones, what I then asked Jack to do is look at the milestones and roughly, again, doesn't have to be super accurate, but roughly estimate the percentage of work that each milestone represents. And the reason is because you can work backwards. If you have a percentage, then you can say, well, if the budget is $100 and this milestone is at 10%, then the budget for the milestone is $10, right? You can essentially work backwards. Then what I did is I pay on milestone completion. So I paid Jack 50% of the first milestone, which was also the biggest milestone up front. And that's basically just to say that, I'm serious, and also give him some runway to commit to doing the work. And then as each milestone is completed, we essentially pay the remaining balances, right? Until the project is done, and then the total budget obviously has been released. I think this is the best way to approach it because it does a couple things. One, it gives the developer that initial injection of cash to commit to it and start building, which is good for them. It protects the founders because if the work doesn't get done, it's not like they've escaped the entire budget, right? They're releasing it as things are done. I also like the fact that it keeps, and Jack, you might not like this, but I like the fact that it keeps developers hungry because if you don't finish, you don't get paid, right? If you want that money, you need to move quicker. I like that incentive that it creates. I think it's very useful. But also, I know what the total cost of this project is going to be. That way I can prepare for it, like budget-wise, marketing-wise, project-wise, I can understand what's going on. And also for the developer, they know what they're going to get paid for it. So they can also manage their own workload if they're not full-time because they sort of, know what they need to make on a monthly basis. And so they can guesstimate. Whereas if you commit to something like an hourly thing, I'm sure a lot of founders abandon projects midway. And then what happens is you thought you were going to earn this much and then you don't because it wasn't project script, it was just hourly, and it can also go the other way around. And then what happens is anything that is outside of scope, so that initial Figma file that I gave you, anything that gets added to that has to be discussed with the developer on a case-by-case basis. And two things are going to happen. Either it's going to increase the budget of the project, or it's going to essentially just be included in it and it's a small variance. And the only thing that I would tell founders to do, if you do have to make changes, arguably you shouldn't. This was a unique case because we were designing as we were going. When I was doing the product design, I specifically made sure that the additional elements that we built were not more dev work. It's the same tables. If you look at the payments page, the customers page, subscription page, and the logic page, it's the same table. It's just displaying different data, which is a small thing, versus completely new UIs, completely new ways to display stuff. Like that would have been enormous work. And I knew that. So I functionally chose to make it the same page with small variants to minimize development cost. Therefore, it was a reasonable thing for me to expect for Jack to say, well, let's include it in the budget because it's not like something entirely new. And that's sort of the approach that I've taken, and I think it's worked quite well. I don't know, Jack, if you disagree with that or if you think that's how founders should sort of approach it.
Yeah, no, I think 100%. It's everything you say is really valid. I'm going to add another thing, and I think it's really important for a founder to be curious when they interact with a developer. You aren't going to know everything the developer knows about technology generally. Even if you're the most technologically literate founder, I guarantee you the developer will have more specific knowledge than you will. But be curious and ask questions to then expand the knowledge and create more of a dialogue between the developer and the founder. It shouldn't be a transactional relationship. You aren't going in saying, build this, get in a product. You are going with that to build your personal knowledge of the way the development ecosystem works, but also to build your own development. Also to give you specific knowledge of the nuances of the software and the skills that you will build. Going into this, there was things about specific things that I didn't know before I started building Sphere and Simple Payments to Higher Even. And having this dialogue with Courtne, telling you what I know, and him willing to take that knowledge on, as well as me just getting stuck in, made this project so much more fun and so much more rewarding to work on.
Have you found that, like working with other people, that it's been very dogmatic in terms of relationships, like build this and why is it not done and whatever? Because for me, again, like I think I sometimes take it for granted that I do a lot of these things naturally. Like I didn't think about it. I just do it because I have the experience and the background on it. But did you find that like a lot of founders are very just like, almost like talking to robots and just no relationship and just very like tough to deal with?
I'd say with startup founders, there is a lower probability of that. But with agency clients, when I was working in agency design and agency development, I found them very, very transactional. Because I used to work as a solutions architect, so what I'd do is I would go in and help translate their ideas into workable, developable solutions. It's just a very specific problem that gave me a wealth of experience in how I can break down problems and approach things. But in doing that, you're essentially telling a founder, no, it's just a sensible thing to do. They shut off, and then all of a sudden, it becomes very transactional, very democratic, and it becomes very unsatisfying.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, because I think I'm just naturally curious. Like we've had lots of conversations about random things, which just completely changed my insight and curious. I think I've even sounded like a bit of a moron a couple times. And again, like that's another like small thing that I would tell founders is like it's okay to sound like an idiot. The basic example of this is I was confused between what was it, Prisma and Drizzle.
Yeah.
I thought one was a Google backed product and the other was not. And I was like, but we're using the Google Tech Cloud. Why are we not? And when you shot back and you're like, but both of them are Google, it doesn't really matter. I had a brief moment where I was like, I must have sounded like such an idiot when I said that Slack message. But now I know. And, now I've learned. So the next time I build a product, I won't have that issue. And just the ability to be curious and ask those questions and not be scared to highlight that you don't have all the technical knowledge, I think is super important. I think it also depends on working with the right people. Like ultimately, like if you work with people that you enjoy working with, I think it sort of, takes care of itself. But yeah, I think that wraps this session. That's everything that I wanted to go over. I think in short summary, that is how I would approach hiring a developer, and also from a developer's standpoint, what they would like to receive, how I look at the project management standpoint and the payment structure and stuff. I know a lot of people have been asking me about that and they were curious. A brief little demo of Spio, and also like we keep using the word Spio and I've noticed people are getting confused. So just for clarity, Spio is shorthand for simple payments, right? We took the S, we took the P, we added the .io because I've noticed people are confused. So that's what that is. A short little demo. I think the next series, we should have a much closer working product. And then we can get into what I'm excited for, which is, engaging users and bringing them on and then making adjustments and using Agile to find product market fit as people use the product. We have an enormous waiting list, something I'm very happy with for the product, which also is unusual. I don't know if you've worked with founders before. Have they had the amount of interest and waiting lists that we have, or is that unusual?
I've worked with a few things, but something I like specifically about this is how you have the waitlist notifications in the development channel. Deeply motivating. Deeply motivating. So I'll wake up in the morning and I'll get to work. And obviously, my time zone's European, so it is America or whatever the time zone difference. So I'll wake up and I'll get 6 notifications from Slack about people who are joining the waitlist. It's like
stuff to do.
Yeah.
So there's like a side hack is if you hire a developer, put a notification in their channel that notifies them every time users are signing up for the waiting list.
There you go. That's
so
the
they
knowledge
get
you get only on this show.
Yeah, there we go. Cool. Well, I appreciate your time, Jack. And to anyone watching, I hope you learned something. And in the next one, we should have a working product. And then we are also working on another product aside from Spio, which might even show up on the next episode before this one. I'm also working with Jack on that. Yeah. So that'll be good to demo and good to show that. But is there anything else, Jack, that you wanted to add?
No, I'm really grateful for your time.
Awesome, guys. We'll see you in the next one.